Yes, my name is Steve Heins, uh, and my company is a not-for-profit called the Practical. Well, there are actually two names, Jason: the Practical Environmentalist and the Energy Pragmatist.
Well, the Energy Pragmatist is the reason for the phone call today
Uh,
because my understanding is through our March Madness Tournament Selection Rules Committee that you've lodged a complaint along with Joe Dancy from down at Texas A&M about the rules and regulations, the fairness, the ethics committee. Boy, I tell you, that complaint was 47 pages long, Stephen Heins. I tell you, boy, you got blown out by Knighten Industries in the first round. And by the way, folks, we're way behind on our podcast today. So, one of the first games that happened in our March Madness bracket was the Energy Pragmatist as a 15 seed taking on Knighten Industries as a 2 seed. Rightfully so, because as Mr. Stephen Heins and Mr. Joe Dancy, Stephen Heins, of course, is on the phone with us. I did not post the rules, and I'll tell you why. First of all, you did. Isn't that true? You questioned the rules behind this.
well, of course.
Because you're a pragmatist. You're just like, hey, listen, you can't.
Exactly. Well,
So,
and I don't remember playing.
so
That's the
well,
other thing, Jason.
that might be the most real part of all of this that you don't remember playing because that's more like real life than I think the average person realizes these days. But let's get back to so what happened was, of course, with March Madness is we were going to do something fun and do the first 64 teams and match them with a team in the tournament. And we were going to do some ping pong balls and the whole deal and say, okay, we do this. And, oh, look at this. Belmont goes with, MBI Energy Services. And then wherever Belmont was in the bracket, we were going to put it in there. And, Kansas. And, we were going to actually basically use the real college teams, take those out, and then put the March Madness Crude Life Energy teams in. And then, of course, based how the regular tournament played out, that was how ours was going to play out. So from my perspective, Mr. Energy Pragmatist Stephen Heins, this wasn't supposed to be any work. I wasn't
Well,
supposed to have any work behind this. I was supposed to ride on the coattails of March Madness.
and it was a great idea.
So
It's too bad that we had to shut down the country for a couple of weeks or a month.
well, and honestly, the reason I did not shut down the March Madness tournament is because I thought this would be something fun that we all could do. And so what I did do was the first round, and I'm going to now on Friday. I am going to actually video this so people can see it because, like I said, when people, self-respecting people and other respected people like yourself and Joe Dancy, not to mention the fact that you guys have over 20, 25, 30,000 followers on LinkedIn. So you guys are also social media influencers. So I got to know my role there. We're going to video it. And here's how we did the methodology for the first round. Now, we're going to do different methodology each round, but I will post it ahead of time. Now, keep in mind, it's just me here. So right now, I got, my intern Provolone, but he doesn't get paid, so he only helps when he wants. What we did is we did Yahtzee. Okay?
Okay.
Four quarters in a basketball game, and you roll the dice. If you get five, either 5 rolls, Yahtzee. You add up those, that's your points for the quarter. And then because of the seeding, we added the points of the seed on the score of the Yahtzee rolls at the end. So you do 4 rolls, 4 quarters, you add on the seeds, that's your final score. You can
I
only
thought
get
it was easy. This sounds like a lot of work to me.
Oh, it is a lot of work. I mean, I have to roll dice, and then I have to do math, and I have to type in things, and then I tell you, it was a lot more work than I ever really wanted. But I appreciate you protesting, and I appreciate Joe Dancy protesting, and and actually, I think this is going to be a lot of fun, to be honest, this tournament. And you mentioned that you used to play a little bit back in the day, huh?
Oh, you bet, I was a player, uh, and once I moved back out to New York to go to school at Columbia, I was there with my best friend, and he and I would go down into Riverside Park and play. And there were, a lot of great one-on-one black basketball players, but nobody played together. So we always did very well
Now, my,
because
my
we actually
guess
passed
is
back and forth.
my guess is you're a taller guy. What are you, about 6'3"?
About 6'2".
6'2", lengthy. You've got some arms, and so I bet you had a sky hook back in those days.
Oh, I did. I had, yes, indeed. Well, as I think I mentioned to you, Kevin McHale really made my game sort of played it in the NBA because, of course, he was 10 inches taller, so we're 9 inches taller. But he worked without the ball mainly. He played position, and he was impossible to block a shot.
And Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, of course, on the other side of the country, had the sky hook. That boy, you couldn't even stop.
Well, he was more of a ballet player, I think, than Kevin McHale.
That's a good way to put it, actually, because he did that little leg he had that protected him from blocking, along with that sky hook. Boy, it was like a ballet. It was a work of art.
Oh, yes, yes. In some ways, we miss him. Well, he's still visible, and he's a very smart guy.
He is. Now, let's transition to real life. This coronavirus, of course, it canceled the March Madness tournament along with a lot of other aspects of life. The one thing that honestly, it keeps me up at night is how quickly the shutdown happened, how easily the people shut down, how they self-quarantined, how, this is very much a manufactured consent type of a thing that happened. But what really worries me is the state of small business when this is going to be all said and done. I'm so worried for small business because, well, a variety of reasons. But what are you seeing with this coronavirus? The world of energy. You've been covering energy for a long time. You've been covering the world of telecommunications and communications. So obviously, the ramp up of telecommunications that's going to happen when this is, well, as of right now, it's happening as we speak. People are getting trained on it this morning.
Well, and they've come up with a new word, Jason, telemedicine, which is kind of what I've been talking about. One of the offshoots, if you will, of the integration between energy and high speed and the ability to go 100 miles away, and this would really be important in poorer parts of the world.
What's interesting about the telemedicine is, just to do a little quick sidebar here, and I don't want to get into a different political discussion, but that telemedicine happened with Obama's Healthcare Act, whatever that whole controversial thing was. In there was something about telemedicine, and the cannabis industry took advantage of that in California. And so there was doctors that were doing telemedicine to people in different states over Skype, and then they would ship them flower of cannabis right in the mail from that California office. So anyway, just some industries figure out those loopholes right away, and then the rest of society figures out, oh, okay, there was a reason for that. We need the telemedicine. And anyway, I just wanted to point that out because I figured you'd get a kick out of that story.
Oh, absolutely. And one of my favorite, let's say, TV series called The Wire, was about Baltimore in the early 2000s, and the crooks and the drug dealers figured out how to use the internet and technology and cell phones before the cops did. And I think that's really what's going, that's what happened with this. But now, simply because of the, let's say, the overload on the medical system, not just in this country, but, internationally, it makes more and more sense. So you're starting to see, they're going to start using these opportunities more. And I think this kind of, jump started a lot that I see coming anyway. Uh,
What do you make behind the narrative already that this is helping the environment? We've been pretty vocal, and
uh,
you have as well about just the narrative behind the environmental movement against fossil fuels, and that's what I'm specifically talking about here. Is that specific context, that narrative? And I already am seeing the narrative come that, people not going to work and not moving around is helping the planet. I'm seeing some sprinkles already of that. Are you
yeah,
seeing those?
well, yeah, sure. I mean, it really offends me. A Harvard professor did a long interview on the integration between climate change and uh, this downturn and the, what is it called, the coronavirus, and it's just silliness, Jason, as you and I both know. Uh, I'm hoping that one of these fine days, and sooner rather than later, that a lot of the people who are trying to make every story into something about them will finally get exposed for what Tom Sawyer used to call stretchers. That is lies to make them, to improve how they look. But it's very embarrassing. Intellectually speaking, they have no girth anymore. I mean, even the New York Times. I mean, you go down the CNN even did a series in a story on this integration between the coronavirus and emission reductions, and now they're talking about China because they had that period where they stopped working, and they noticed by satellite that there's fewer clouds in the air, or smog. What is really what it is, in China, it's really smog. This is not a sign of global warming or climate change. It's good old fashioned smog.
Well, and that's one of the reasons I wanted to bring it up was I'm starting to see the framework of this come out early, so I wanted to try to nip it in the bud any way I possibly can. I don't know. I mean, we've got good listenership here at the Crude Life, but we're not setting records yet like Ron Burgundy in the podcast world. But I do think that it's something that needs to be watched. I think those people who are in charge of combating that should probably get on board really quick with that, because the narrative, like I said, is already starting. I guess, getting back to the coronavirus, and we're talking about narratives and responsibility of the media. One of the points I've been trying to point out that I do wish the mainstream media would point out is there is going to be an increase of coronavirus cases just because they're testing for them now. They have not been testing for them up until like last week. So there's going to be a spike because people are testing for them. What do you make of that comment, Steve Heins?
Well, I think that's absolutely right. And it's 24 hours a day now. It's become, the story du jour, or de week, or de month. And the major news right now is centered around this transition, if you will, from sort of feeling a little fat and sassy to, as you put it earlier, having to worry about small businesses. I noticed that this has stunned me. You've been watching the price of oil. Canada's oil right now is selling for $8 a barrel.
Wow.
Think about that for a second, Jason. Now, they have their own distribution problems, and they have their own environmentalists, and some interference from the American environmental groups and foundations, spending money up in Canada to keep them pure. But it's just amazing. I mean, you've been watching it. I listened to you, just so you know, and I think you've done a great job of coverage. And I think you're speaking out more, and I think editorializing, which I think you have every right to do.
Well, it was time to do that. By the way, however you have your phone on the last 30 seconds, it sounds much clearer than you had it before. It sounded a little bit muffled earlier, and now it sounds very clear. Just a heads up on that.
Sure. It's my
I
phone.
do.
I didn't have it moved my
Well,
phone.
there we go. It's muffled again. So, however you had it before, just put it up to your mouth, maybe.
Okay.
Okay, I
I
did want to
can do
ask
that.
you about small business. You've been
Yeah.
around for a long time. You're over 40 years old, so you're considered old. And I found that
75,
out.
Jason, 75.
Oh, by the way, I found that out. When you hit 40 and you start to say the word 40, it doesn't even matter if you say 1, 2, 3, 4, 9. As soon as you start the word fort, boy, the people's face, they just tune it out. They don't care. You're old, man. Too late, man. Your ship has sailed. Anyway,
Well,
I did want to ask you about small business though, because you've seen recessions, you've seen boom and bust cycles in oil and
yeah.
gas. You've, like I said, your background of telecommunications and communications, so you've seen disruptions in marketplaces, and you've seen not only disruption in marketplaces but startups. And so basically, you've seen it all.
Well, I worked on Wall Street, Jason.
One
So
second.
I worked
I've
on Wall Street in that era, and I did venture capital for
so
4 years.
exactly. So you've seen all these different things. I've covered a lot of industries in the last 25 years of my experience in the media. And so I feel like I've got this 5,000-foot view in a lot of different sectors. I'm no expert by any means, but I will say this. I do think small business is not going to be the same when this is all said and done because, number one, when I look at Boeing, no matter what happens to Boeing, they're going to get bailed out. I really believe that our government has proven time and time again that you're too big to fail. But
Yep.
if you're a small business, there ain't anybody looking out for you anymore at all. And that really concerns me because right now I'm looking at some of the federal grants and money's coming in, and they're not. It's not. They're going to economic development corporations and they're not even going to small businesses for the most part. And it's kind of a little bit of wordplay because in the energy world, oh my word, so much of it's small business. So much of it is just small business. And I'm so worried about this industry. Talk to me a little bit about what you're seeing about the state of small business.
Well, I think you're absolutely you're onto something. I think that I listened to a couple of your discussions with Joe Dancy, and you were talking about the transition for the energy business, and it's never going to go back the way it was, and it will continue to be as much a technology and information play in real time as as any other business. But in some ways, I too worry about small business because I've watched what you guys have done in North Dakota. I mean, speaking of small businesses, with a few exceptions, I mean you're a state of small businesses, and you beat everybody to the punch in a certain way because they didn't you were flyover country and nobody watched you, and you took fracking from A to Z before anybody even seemed to notice.
So I'm going to throw in a little bit of my shale play profitness or my you're just downright craziness, when people roll their eyes. And well, the prophets always get called crazy right away. And I have so much on record now over the past 10 years on interviews that they're, like I said, these are emails I get, people telling me that, boy, you called it. And then one person flat out said, boy, you're a shale play prophet. And I went, I'm using that. That's mine going forward now. Anyway,
I noticed that you've done a really, you're a very creative guy. So, and lively. You're lively.
well, hey, listen, you know what? You talk enough, and a blind squirrel's going to find a nut from time to time. So, you know what? You take your squirrel nuts when you can, and you move on, right? And
Well, but the nice thing is, and I think you even mentioned it either on a podcast or maybe in some of your writing, but the discussions from a couple of years ago that you and I did, or 3 years ago. I mean, they're still timely right now. We just happen to be ahead of the curve on a lot of this.
Oh, our environmental talks from several years ago are still spot on, and it
They
just,
are.
makes me think a lot of the leaders should go back and listen to it because it's still ahead of the curve. Actually, it still is. Here's what I'm going to ask you, Steve. So you know as well as I do that foreign companies have been, fracking in the Bakken and down in the Permian and probably in the Marcellus too. Foreign companies have been building petrochemical plants down in Lake Charles, and I don't know if they have in Corpus Christi, but it would make sense just
They
because.
do. Yes, they
Well,
do.
it's just when they're paying $15 for natural gas and we're paying minus $3 or $2, it's cheaper for a company in France to build a petrochemical plant down in Lake Charles. Okay, so this is really happening. These are real things that are happening, and we can talk American independence of energy all day long, but there's still foreign companies coming in and doing this. So, with that being said, the state of small business where it's at, I take a look at a lot of the real estate out there, and I think of a lot of my friends that own like Airbnb property, and I don't know how much longer they can keep, 10, 15, $20,000 a month payments on hotels and investment properties out of state that they're not occupying and that people can't get to. So when I think
Well,
of, that ripple, and I think of, the server that can't pay the rent, and so therefore the landlord is impacted, and I'm just saying, this is just immediate problems. And
and there is a food chain, which is kind of what you're talking about.
totally,
There is a
and that's
real.
where I'm getting at, to where when the economy resets, because it already is going to, whether as soon as Vegas said we're shutting down, that meant okay, the economy is going to reset somehow. We don't know how yet, but it's going to.
Yep.
I do
And we don't
wonder
know
if
what
like
those
it's just going to be like a mad world. Remember that movie, a mad world?
Are you kidding? I love that movie.
I do wonder if it's going to be like that with real estate at some point, because when you have so many Airbnb investors that are just going to be giving their keys back to the bank because, they have to, and you've got all this different stuff. It makes me wonder if shopping malls aren't going to be bought up by sheiks from Saudi Arabia and
No, they're closing. I got involved with a couple of the enclosed malls, and I was a business broker for a while, and a commercial real estate broker. I have a fairly colorful past, but I'm watching the strip centers and the indoor malls, with exceptions like New Jersey and maybe Phoenix and Southern California. They are nobody wants them anymore. They're getting converted into mail order businesses and all of that. So I think it's going to be much like the video store. It was enormous for a while. It had enormous value, but as you put it, people gave the keys back to the landlord.
But that's what I mean. There's going to be a lot of property that is going to be very inexpensive, and the energy industry generally, you can see the trends happen first. And the trend is you could see the foreign companies coming into America and just basically integrating in and assimilating in. I think that's going to happen in real estate when this is all said and done, where there's going to be well, there's just going to be a lot of big buildings for sale. That's all.
You bet.
And it makes me wonder.
Not many buyers. Not many buyers.
No, but the thing is, the wealth is still going to be out there on the planet. That's the thing, and so we'll probably see a lot more mergers and acquisitions in terms of small business. A lot more companies being bought out and, of course, bankrupt and then getting pillaged afterwards and that sort of thing. I'm just really worried about small business, and I was talking with Brandon Davis with Swan Energy. And he talked about the idea, or not the idea, but the fact that somebody's even mentioning nationalizing oil. And we flat out said, boy, we are living in a time where everything seems to be on the table. Every discussion.
What a bad idea that is, Jason.
Oh, totally. But I mean, it's already being floated out there.
I know. Well,
So-
but it's the chattering class. And as you were saying earlier about, taking the latest international health problems and making it into a story about climate change, et cetera. I mean, so in some ways, the more time people have to talk about this, the crazier the ideas get. So, I am hoping that guys like yourself and the people you've been interviewing, uh, are heard more often because there's a real sanity uh, to uh, to a more practical approach to all of this, and a little faith in human ingenuity. And you've watched us. I think you've been doing the Baca now for about 10 years, right? I mean, what you've seen. I mean, I could see you in a rocking chair with a corncob pipe, talking to 20-year-old and said, talking about back then, before the world changed forever. Here's what I remember. But you're I think it's time for the adults to take over, and it's time for the so-called experts to make sure to let us know that their expertise is in a very small area, and they're going to get washed overboard also. And
Here's
they're not going to be interviewed or.
well, your phone's cutting out again, Steve. So I'm gonna
Okay, sorry.
I'm gonna jump in here and
Okay, go ahead.
and I'm gonna say a comment that is not popular, but it's gaining popularity because the more people think about it, the more they realize how right I am. Okay, right now I get it that this is a problem and this is an issue, and for some reason it is a bigger issue than the flu, and it's very much like in terms of the death rate, in terms of the way that the contagion is very much like the flu, but it's being treated much more like anthrax or like a smallpox or like a SARS type of a thing. So that's not lost on me, and I'm not saying it's not important. But what I will say is when I started seeing schools close down before the CDC and public health officials were saying to close down, there was this short period of time where leadership almost could outfreak each other. Like, oh, I can freak out more than you. Well, I can freak out more than you. And again, I'm not trying to downplay this, but what I don't want to get lost in all of this is there are a lot of six-figure salaried people, because at that level you make six figures, okay? There are a lot of people that are making good money and their lifestyle's not going to change at all because they're going to continue to go to work, they're going to continue to get their checks, and all the small business owners out there are not going to have that. And so in the next month, let's say everything went back to normal, every small business owner is going to, it might take them a year or two to rebound from this. Well, those leaders and people, they go back, they don't even blip, not even a blip. And that's where real leadership comes up. And so I just wanted to get your thought on that, because you've been around the block a few times and you've seen some good leaders and bad leaders. And you know me, I sometimes stick my foot in my mouth and sometimes I say the things that are not very popular. But that's why this program is the voice of the voiceless.
Oh, well, and that's a great name also. I think that's right. But I think you've heard, what I think on a lot of this. You and I share a lot of these concerns. Now, I think with the virus, the one thing that happened is that everybody realized that we can't even forget about predicting 100 years from now or 20 years from now. We can't even predict. We're as bad as the weathermen right now. We can't predict what's going to happen 3 days from now. And if you trace back the last 3 or 4 weeks, I mean, everybody was waiting to see if there was a pattern, and it's really being transformed in front of our eyes, and everybody in the world is stuck with the proposition that don't count on tomorrow because it may not come the way you think it is.
Here's the parts that I keep my eye on is really the NBA was the first line of this, where not only did they have the first players confirmed, they were kind of besides Tom Hanks, were really the first celebrities in terms of household names. And The players were irrelevant. It was the NBA, and then of course Tom Hanks. But when the NBA canceled the season, that sent the snowball rolling. In fact, March Madness and WrestleMania and everybody else basically cited once the NBA did it, then the precedent was set. The NBA, of course, they were going to try to do the fanless experience, which shows you the value of television contracts. They were going to do the fanless experience until the players got tested. Now, this is what's not lost on me. Is number one, those NBA players played for several weeks. They had the coronavirus, the COVID-19, and none of the other players or none of the other like people that they played against got it. The testing's done, and they didn't get it. Okay, so when you think about their bumping and sweating and everything else, well, that narrowed down how it's contagious. Okay, so that means the sneezing and the coughing and the surfaces, and you put your hand on it and that sort of thing. So this is very, very controllable. Okay, probably even more so than the flu. And so that's not lost on me. And then also what's not lost on me is how what's not also lost on me though is, like I said before, the way they're treating this, the way that they want this very controlled, which tells me that there's more to this story than I think they're probably letting us know.
Well, I'm not sure I share your conspiracy theory.
No, it's not a conspiracy. It's just that it's a little bit different, that the way that they're treating this. That I think that's really more for our benefit, if that makes sense. That I'm kind of trusting them a little bit on this. That okay, maybe we should be listening to them a little bit more.
Well, I think it's pretty hard to ignore right now. I think it's gone from peripheral to someplace in China to where we are right now in our country. I mean, France, Spain, Italy. It's, the demons have been unleashed and will never be the same. I mean, the world won't be the same.
No.
And the only question right now is, especially when you have, two players, Russia and the Sauds, who decide to get in if I can use this word, a pissing match in the middle of all of this. I mean, that's not lost on anybody either.
No.
I mean, they just literally, it was really down to two guys who decided, if you're not going to do it, I'm not going to do it either. I don't know how long they can survive, because they've lived off the fat of the land when oil was $70, $80, $100 a barrel. So their society, they've relied on their keeping their power in their societies by that extra cash, and it's now gone. How long can the Russians or the Sauds or any of the Middle Eastern countries survive very long? Their societies survive very long if they don't have a more comfortable price for their product.
And, getting back to the conspiracy things, I kind of looked up some of the conspiracy one day because it was on a news story we had, and I kind of chuckled at a lot of it. But I understand there are quite a few people out there that are, going down that path. And that wasn't that wasn't my point. I just wanted to make sure anybody listening knows I wasn't going down that path of that. I was just pointing out that, when you look at how contagious it is, like I said, if you use the NBA example, you did it. You had guys sweating and bumping up against each other, and if it didn't transfer that way, that was a good sign. And it was a good sign by the contagion aspect, but also it was a good sign because now they know more precisely what it is. The real scary part, though, is how apparently I read a news story where it went from animal to animal, then animal to human, and then human to human. And to see it mutate like that was a little bit concerning because, how do you control the animal kingdom? So
well, and it's the way the Chinese, their open markets, they created the environment where these open markets with all these animals sort of mixed together with the people themselves. I mean, there is now some talk, and I don't think, internationally speaking, that they're going to try is, that somebody's going to try, the World Health Association or organization is going to try and make it illegal for these open markets in China. And I'd like to say, well, good luck with that.
Yeah.
We have no power over what's happening there.
Yeah, it's it's definitely going to change things, and if you were to reflect it, I guess in the United States, I suppose it'd be like a farmer's market or a flea market, but far worse, right? I mean, where you can buy bat wings and stuff. Yeah.
Well, I still have this image. Somehow, as I've been kind of watching this unfold while I continue, to research and pay attention to the energy world, as you know, environmental world, telecommunication, watching it sort of come together. But there was some footage showing a Chinese guy in a wok cooking a live dog. I mean, he's walking, WOK, a dog, and it's still alive. It's
Well, that's an odd thing.
it's very painful to watch. I promise you.
Well, I was going to say we should. I was looking at the clock, and we got to get running here. So I was going to have you plug your business and how you make a living these days, and what kind of services you have, etc. So website and the whole deal, if you got one.
Yep. Well, I do. Although I've been working on doing an update, but man, as most people, it's funny that the environmentalists. That's where all the money is going. The private sector somehow just doesn't value us as much as they do the Sierra Club. Maybe I sent this to you, Jason. The Nature Conservatory raised $1 billion 3 years ago, and that's just in donations. Think about that for a second.
Mm-hmm.
We watch friends like Tom Shepstone or Jim Willis or any number of people scratching out a living. There's a lack of fairness here right now. And I think you and I have to be apostles, for a more sane approach that goes back to the old-fashioned American values.